Hi everyone. This is Joe Signorelli with OPG. Thank you for taking the time to come and spend a few minutes with us today. We've got a great session that's featuring Aruta's Rich Bello and ASC advisor Steve Bruce, who are heavyweights in the industry and on this topic of contingency planning for alternative investment funds. We're very appreciative of their time joining us to talk to you guys for the next hour about their experiences and expertise. A few really small house cleaning things. We're going to record the session. It will be available for everyone to access if you need to re-access anything after the fact. We'll distribute any slides and contact information after as well, so you have that. For those who are not OPG members, OPG is a COO and CFO think tank where we support the day-to-day operations for investment advisors, professionals in that function. Feel free to check us out at ourpeergroup.com. And that's the house cleaning. So a little bit, we've got Rich I've known for many years as well. He worked alongside Julian Robertson and future Tiger Cub founder of Tiger Management, and co-founded what's now the industry-leading Blue Ridge Capital with John Griffin. And now he's the CEO and founder at Aruta, which is a firm dedicated to servicing the alternative investment industry by providing advisory, consulting services, talent acquisition, and professional development solutions like executive coaching. So we're really, really excited that he's with us today. And alongside him, Steve Bruce, I've known for a very long time, and we're very appreciative. He co-founded ASC Advisors in 2010, and he's been providing strategic counsel to financial services firms for over 40 years. During the last 20 years, he's focused almost exclusively on advising hedge funds and private equity firms in every facet of their business, from brand building to investor and media relations, speech and media training, position level support, IPOs, and crisis management. So as you can see, we've got two people at a very high level here that are going to give us some great insights. So I'm going to be quiet because I don't have anything useful to say. They do. I'm going to throw it over to you guys. And again, the only other item is if you have questions or you want to ask the guys questions during the course, there's a question feature on your bar for the GoToWebinar. Submit it through there. We'll monitor it, and we might jump in and ask the questions during the course, or we'll save some time at the end. So Rich, Steve, the floor is yours.
Terrific. Well, Joe, thanks so much for hosting this today. We're proud to be supporting you with our peer group. And for those of you that are not members, we'd encourage you to talk to Joe, as the type of discussions that we're going to have today, as well as the other information that our peer group provides, I think is really valuable. And with that, I'm really pleased that Rich is joining me in doing this discussion today about contingency planning for alternative investment funds. And before we kick off, we'd like to share a video which I would like to describe as art imitating reality. So with that, we're going to show a short video to kick things off.
You, get up. Yeah, you.
All right, lawyer.
Sir, we have a warrant for your arrest. You can get a lawyer in your holding cell.
Lawyer.
William Stern, you are under arrest for insider trading and securities fraud. You have the right to remain silent. You might want to exercise that right.
Let's go.
So not exactly the happiest looking crowd, but I will tell you, back in 2010, I was representing a client who had been raided by the FBI at that time, not Blue Ridge. This was well documented. And on the back end of it, later that night, I got a phone call from one of the most senior folks in that organization. And what he said was, I think he probably had a nice glass of whatever lubricant he might have needed after having been raided by the FBI. He said to me, you know, Steve, I went through the Chief Operating Officer manual this afternoon and was looking for the pages about what happens when the FBI raids you and they don't exist. Well, I bet in about a couple of weeks, every law firm will have them out there. So with that, I'm going to hand this off to Rich to start our discussion today.
Well, thanks, Steve, and thank you, Joe. It's a real honor to be on the same panel with you, Steve. I've known you for many years. We won't say how long. We don't age ourselves, and Joe as well. And thanks to OPG, a fabulous organization. So, we're talking about contingencies. And these are things that you don't need to do. We've got executive coaching and advisor for hedge funds. When we're coaching, we talk about time management and deadlines and procrastination, and this falls directly in that area because there's no real deadline for what we're going to be talking about today until it happens, right? So it's easier to procrastinate on things if they don't have a deadline. So the deadline is when they come in. It's like, oh shoot, we didn't prepare for this. So what is a contingency? A contingency, as you can see on the screen, is an event or situation. It can be an internal event, it can be an external event, and it poses a risk to the firm, risk to your operations of your firm, of your fund. So they come in all different flavors and sizes. We have them down here. You guys know what they are. There's all kinds of business issues, firm closures, regulatory, criminal investigations. We just saw a fun one there. External events. There's all different types of contingencies that you can deal with. And the first step when you're talking about them is when you're thinking about them is to identify what they are, right? What they are. And this principle one comes by the way. Steve and I worked on a book on this topic, and we'll share that with you. Share that with you at the end. So we've come up with 10 principles as a framework for dealing with contingencies. So why don't we move to the next slide, unless Steve, you had anything to add to that?
No, I think what we really want to, when talking with Joe and when Rich and I proposed this to him, part of the reason was because of recent events. And so, for example, I don't know whether everybody's been following this, but the FCA has proposed a set of rules where they will announce investigations upon inception. And they're not backing off from this. I was with the Financial Times last week, and a reporter who met with FCA said, oh, we're going to be careful about the types of things we do, but we think that we're going to be going forward, that this is an important proposal and rule that will cause folks to change their behavior. We view it under a quite different lens, but the point is that from a contingency planning and from a crisis communications perspective, there's a chance if this rule passes that firms will get up to a day's notice or no notice before the FCA is putting out a press release announcing that your firm is under investigation. So that is a potential new reality that requires the type of planning that we're going to talk about today. And then moving on shore, in terms of things like notification, the SEC just fined ICE $10 million for failing to notify the SEC within 24 hours of a cyber breach. It's one of the first times that they've actually hit a firm with a fine for the 24-hour rule. And then moving into another area, on top of that, the SEC has been decrying defense lawyers for being supportive of their clients and defending them. So you've got a bunch of different things. And then also the last headline we wanted to share was, the crash of Berkshire Hathaway stock last week. So there's any number of things that can happen that you need to start preparing for. We just wanted to bring these up as very recent headlines, and also on the regulatory front, how FCA is now thinking about looking at investigations going forward, and they're not backing away from this. So this is not only current, but it's imperative that people start to factor this into planning as they go forward. I'm going to hand this back to Rich now for a few critical pieces.
Yeah, just again on that, these are things that don't really have deadlines, right? So that's why people often don't focus on these things. There's Stephen Covey principle 2 in his great book on the 7 habits of highly effective people, and that the top habit, my favorite habit there, is habit 3, and that's first things first. And he goes through a time matrix, and in that time matrix he talks about things that are urgent and important. Now these may not seem like they're urgent, but they're important. Usually you get to things that are urgent and important, you're doing them. This is important, may not be urgent now, but you never know when it might hit. So get ahead of these things. Usually these are the types of things that don't make it to the top of the list. And if they don't, you'll be sorry. So if something happens. So For our principle 2, we want to identify the stakeholder. Who is important in dealing with these issues? So know your stakeholders. Be thinking about these people in advance, so you've got them. So obviously your LPs, you have fiduciary obligation, your LPs, the board of directors, your employees, and Steve likes to talk about this all the time, is like make sure you got your employees top of the mind. People may neglect that. They can go out to the LPs, like you got to make sure employees are there. You got to have their back. Contractors, similar to employees, vendors, banks, prime brokers, depending on the type of situation, also may be important. Law firms, we're going to really dig into that one. Lawyer. For the people who just joined, there was we did a video to start up from Billions. PR firm, something that Steve knows a little bit about. Insurance companies, you got to make sure you got to notify them right away, or you may not be able to collect on a claim. So, and there are others. So when we're talking about communication protocols, what are the best practices that we're talking about here? Usually timeliness and clarity are crucial. You want to make sure you're really clear, have things in advance, have these communications prepared in advance wherever you can. Understand the needs of these stakeholders. Each of the stakeholders has different types of needs, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the slides ahead. So here's some examples of how to deal with certain stakeholders. Employees, you want to make sure they're really clear in their roles. You want to define their roles up front. So when there is an emergency, a situation, this crisis situation, they know exactly what they've got to do. You want to make sure that they understand they're safe. If there's a disaster situation, you got to make sure employees know that they're safe. You got to take care of them, but they're not going to take care of you. Make sure they're provided with the resources to do their jobs. Investors, obviously, LPs. A lot of times when there are these events, what are they concerned with? What are their needs? What are they worried about? Obviously, performance. And if there's some risk going on with the fund, they want to know. Regulatory bodies, what are they concerned with? They want to make sure that you're transparent what's going on, or they're coming in, right? Take it over. Want to make sure that you have a sense of accountability. Legal counsel, ensure that your actions comply with the law, right? You're not going to want to make sure that you're in there and complying with the law, and you're really dealing with them in the right way. Steve, media?
Absolutely. Look, it's important that either you or the firms that you work with have the established relationships. In that way, you can take down the temperature in a crisis situation, and that can really help with the outcomes. And be prepared to understand the ground rules around those communications. And we'll get that into a little bit more detail, but that can be critical to how impressions and also how the markets will react to what's going on at your firm.
All right, next slide.
Okay, so this is a slide that we really like to talk about because it's really the ecosystem around investment management. And so the way that you think about it is not only do you end up talking to these folks, but they end up talking among themselves. And so we like to look at this as the group that you need to understand who the people are in all of these corners of the ecosystem, and because they can influence the different outcomes, whether it's with regulators or the media. So understanding what that ecosystem is and who are the people you need to be in contact with and who your team has to be in contact with as a crisis unfolds can be the difference between how the firm goes forward or where it's left.
Right, like you say, Steve, they're going to be talking to each other. You may want to get to them first. They hear the story first from you. All right.
Okay.
So conducting principle 3, be prepared, conduct these exercises. Don't just have it be we've got a plan. The plan is good, right? You want to have the plan. Then you need to practice executing the plan. So, well, I guess it's more than a decade ago, my partner, John Griffin, co-founder of Blue Ridge, came to me. Now, he really stayed out of the operational aspects of the firm for the most part. He just left that to me. But he came to me one day and said, Rich, I want you to be prepared. I was talking to a professor of mine, and this is really important. I want you to make sure that we are prepared. Conduct mock tabletop exercises for any contingency that we think could occur. Now, by any, obviously, those contingencies that have a decent probability of occurrence and a high impact when they occur. So I called in Steve to help me with this. Like, all right, Steve, big part of this is PR. So conducting, we're going to get into that. So why are they important? Well, you'll have a plan. You've got a plan. That's the first part of it. And you're really not going to know what the gaps are in that plan until you play out this exercise. So you also want to make sure that before you have this exercise, everybody know, or before any contingency happens, everybody knows what their role is. You got to make sure, just like a game, right? A game plan, make sure you know what your role is. So you assemble the team, you have a team leader, somebody has to be in charge of this. Now you do, and Steve and I have talked about, and Steve likes to point this out, is you do want to make sure you free up the founder, the portfolio manager, worry about the portfolio. He or she has to worry about that. Somebody else has to be operating the crisis, right? Managing the crisis. So who's the team leader of that? Can be the COO, the president. Now you have to keep the founder and the PM informed, obviously. Then you have senior management. Usually these are the team leaders of all of the different departments that you have. And then there's external groups you want to involve right away in these early tabletop exercises, these mock exercises. And that's a PR firm, law firms, your board, advisors. You have to decide, maybe different for every firm. So then you facilitate it. And this is where Steve came in. He was our facilitator. He ran the whole process for us, a tabletop exercise. You make sure you're very clear on the objectives for the tabletop exercise. What are the rules of engagement for everybody? What's the actual situation or situations? Ideally, you'll go through a few different situations. And then, well, Steve, why don't you take it from here? You were the one that was the facilitator. So why don't you take it from here?
And I want to talk about the external groups for a minute, because sometimes when these events happen, people don't think about their offshore board or their offshore counsel. You know, that becomes kind of an afterthought. You're thinking sort of, oh, this is the event. I've got my US firms or international firms, whatever they may be. And then the board is kind of the last group to know. So we've always said, make sure that your offshore board and your offshore law firm that's working with that board and represents the funds are clearly in the loop. The other thing in doing the tabletop exercise, you very quickly ascertain who is comfortable and who's uncomfortable as these different scenarios are played out. And that allows you then to work with those individuals to make sure that you're shoring up their ability to handle the crisis. And they understand what the roles are. And in many cases, you know, legal, your internal law team is working with multiple groups. You've got the IR team that's working to understand and meet investors. And if you've got a large number of investors, that group can get inundated. So having call lists, working through all the elements, identifying who you need to get to first, what disclosure has to be done, understanding that you may have to write an investor letter, but writing it in a way that is almost as though it's going to end up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal or on Bloomberg within minutes. And in many cases, that's exactly what happens. So really taking your team through the paces and doing even simple things like making sure that each group leader has a call list and knows what their priorities are as these exercises are underway. And that's where you really get to see how people interact, how do you stage your priorities, and what does someone like Rich Bello need to know as the coordinator? What's important? What are his priorities as he's managing all of these different teams?
Right, and yeah, and you really never know what could happen. There's only a certain amount of training you can do. At Blue Ridge, we would do insider trading training, and I would always say that we had a robust and awesome compliance department, headed up by Mike Cairo and Terry O'Malley, who was our general counsel. And I would always say, look, it's the analysts that are on the front lines. They've got to be trained. They can't be saved by legal or the compliance department if they go out there and do something, inadvertent. So you never know what could possibly happen. So you have to be planning. You have to be planning for that. And Steve was amazing on the. I still remember it when I get together with Patty Stevens, our CFO. We talk about that tabletop exercise. Steve was like, Terry, here, this is what happened. This guy's like, Patty, what are you going to do? Then you go, oh, cybersecurity breach. So you're just going through and making sure, and like Steve said, you see who's comfortable and who's not, and then you remedy that. So that's the next piece of it. When you're doing these tabletop exercises, the idea is to identify gaps in your plan, identify gaps on the team, identify gaps in who's able to handle themselves under pressure, because that's really what this is all about. Handling yourself under pressure and handling the team under pressure. That's why you have these pre-plans. You've got to make sure you've got it done. When you have pressure situations, it's great to have a checklist. Boom, 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 boom. Here's what we need to do. You've already planned for it. So you debrief, identify these gaps, and then you close the gaps, and then you update your plan. And then you do this, do these tabletop exercises, ideally twice a year is something, because there's going to be different, you don't have to do the same ones, but there's a lot of different potential contingencies you want to prepare for. Okay.
Next.
So sort of an overview of what we've been discussing. This is actually designing the plan itself that you're going to have the mock exercise on. Here's an overview of it. Identifying that leadership team that we talked about that's going to be dealing with the crisis, making sure that everybody's role is crystal clear. You want to make sure they're really clear on what they're going to be doing. You want to anticipate the different risks that could affect your firm. Know the primary stakeholders, as we talked about. Make sure you identify each of their needs in advance. What would they need? How are you going to prepare for what the LPs would need, right? They're going to know, hey, how's this impacting performance? And how's this impacting my risk in the fund? Can I get out? What's the deal what's going on there? The prime brokers, obviously, they have a different, if there's a performance issue, you know what they're going to be looking for. And you want to rank these risks. A high probability, high impact risk, you should probably do that one first. You want to have a mock tabletop act. You want to make sure you have a plan for a high probability, high impact risk. But don't forget about the tail risks also. Those can be the ones that bite you. Right? You probably want to do the high probability, high impact risks first. And then you want to establish some type of outreach and monitoring protocols, as we sort of talked a little bit about before. Steve, do you want to elaborate on some of that?
Sure. And in terms of the investor communication, as I mentioned earlier, everything you write to investors, write it as if it's going to get out. And then working with your PR firm, establish some smart protocols. Things like putting media at your firm address as the central point for all media to inquiries to come with a crisis. That takes some of the pressure off of the front desk, because they will get the inbounds. If they can simply move it over, they don't get into a conversation with reporters or with others, and it helps speed the impact of the response. So it's really critical to use things like that, and also to watch out what's happening on social media. And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail shortly.
All right.
Okay.
Now, this is always an important topic. Many times when you're dealing with crises, the lawyers are going to be involved, right? So you want to understand this is a topic that's a little bit gray sometimes. Privileged versus non-privileged communication. Now, not all, you might be, a lot of people think when they talk to their attorney, it's all privileged, no problem. That's just not the case. When you're directly seeking legal advice, that's when it's privileged, right? And even there are some gray areas there, and there's some exceptions there. As Steve likes to point out, go ahead, Steve. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I think you like to talk about this. Go ahead.
We've always said as we enter into these situations that we've got to be contracted through external counsel, and everything that your PR team does has to be run through counsel, has to be properly marked attorney-client privilege or attorney-client work product, and it has to you have to make sure that you really follow those rules and stick to them, because there are weak links if you don't do it, and that can end up causing you significant issues down the road with regulators or in litigation. So that's one of the critical pieces, is make sure your advisors are contracted through counsel, and make sure that all the communications relating to that matter are properly marked.
That's right. And so why is this important? You're protecting the sensitive information of the firm. And critically important is you want to get the best guidance that you can from your law firm. So that means you need to be open with them, honest with them, and let them know what's going on. Then they'll be able to give you the best advice. there are some exceptions with this as well. So crimes and fraud, this is not a legal discussion. So we're going to leave that to lawyers. Now, handling documents, obviously, depending on the situation, making sure that you are really clear on the backups that you have, making sure that documents aren't destroyed, because you can get caught up in those types of things as well. Again, that's more of a legal issue, but make sure that the team is trained in that beforehand. You have some people panicking on things. Make sure they're trained beforehand. They understand this stuff beforehand. That's why it's so important to have these plans in place and to have your teams understand their roles and have them trained on these before the situation happens.
And just to put an exclamation point on it, at my former firm, there was a criminal matter involving a client with some major trading losses, and we got a visit from the FBI asking for documents. Everything had been properly marked. We had been retained by counsel, but don't think that the FBI won't show up at your doorstep one day.
Right, as we saw in the opening. All right, Steve.
Okay. Yeah. So in terms of media interactions and how to think about crisis situations, understand that one central point as a spokesperson is always the best rule of thumb. Understanding the ground rules. What can you say on the record? What do you want to say either on background or off the record? And this can actually be a huge help, where we've worked with clients, collaborating with them to background reporters to influence the outcome in their reporting and educate them at the same time. It's hugely important because reporters want to understand what's going on. You've got to be careful, make sure you're staying within the legal guidelines, but there's information you can impart in a crisis situation that can help change the outcome in the actual reporting. Of course, what's newer is social media. You've got to monitor it. You've got to watch what's going on. You feel like at times you're playing whack-a-mole because you're constantly seeing misinformation gets reposted. So there's many times that we have to end up chasing down these loose ends as this information gets out that's incorrect to try to get it corrected. There was a point there was a story I'll share, which was one of our clients had huge energy losses, and a news service misreported what a reporter at CNBC had been talking about on air. We had to reach out to the CNBC reporter. That reporter not only went back on air to make sure that this reporting was clarified, but they reached out to that news outlet and they retracted the story. So having rapid responses, really good monitoring and correcting misinformation can make a huge, again, difference in the outcome. We talked about that ecosystem. So understanding who are the points of contact in that ecosystem, who do you have to maintain the relationships with, as those folks can be sometimes your best friends in these matters and support you through that. That clearly happened in that insider trading case, where they enlisted the help of one of their largest investors to say that he was still supporting them because he felt like they had done nothing wrong and they were approaching us the right way. That sort of third-party endorsement really can help a firm continue. And then if you don't have a senior advisory firm, a PR firm that has experience, that's not trying this out for the first time, really reconsider that. Think about why this matters now with these FCA rules, with what the SEC has done on ICE, with how they're approaching these things. If the first time that you're working with a firm is when the crisis is underway, it's going to take them a while to catch up, and then they can be effective. But we think it makes sense, and we've got a number of folks that we are in relationships with just to be there for as a safety. And so that's an important feature. But think about having a PR firm on a retainer in case there's an event. It's part of what you have your law firms there for. It's part of what you talk to your offshore fund administrators. It's part of what you have to talk with your board. It's part of that planning and part of being prepared for events that you don't anticipate. Okay, let's continue.
Well, yeah, I'd like to add a little bit to some of that. We can go back for a second. So, Steve, being humble person that he is, I actually wanted to put this engaging the PR firm as the first bullet because I feel it's so important, for all of this. But she said, no, let's put it. But I know when we started, we founded Blue Ridge. That was one of the first things that John Griffin, being the president of Tiger Management, said it was so important because John had to be so involved with us at Tiger Management. Like, we need to get Steve on board immediately, get him on board. Because these are the people that are going to be in the trenches with you. And yeah, you want to have that relationship early on. Like Steve said, you don't want to be developing the race. Hey, we're in trouble, help us, right? And you know that these firms, firm like Steve's at ASC, will have the relationships already, pre-existing relationships with the reporters. So it's really crucial. And these things are tricky. The on the record, off the record, on background, you can really get yourself in a big hole. It's like, well, I didn't think I was talking to a reporter. I didn't think that was going to be out there. I thought I was just talking to you. It's like, no, you didn't say it was off the record. Really big stuff. I mean, we've had many discussions about that, through the years. And then the person, like Steve, would talk to the media and say, hey, this is off the record. I'm going to be there, just making it clear it's off the record. And now we're at a whole new ball game with social media. You get something going viral out there, you don't stop it. Kind of like you're saying, Steve, whack-a-mole. If you don't stop it, and if you're not first out there to stop it, it can get a life of its own. So the rapid response is so important. And, like I said, and like Steve said, having those relationships in this ecosystem early on, you want to get the first story out there if you ideally can, because that's the story that other stories are based on. So if you can control that speed, I think that's important.
Yeah.
Hey, Steve and Rich, this is Joe. We got a question in from Gary. I just thought it was a good time to ask it. Do you need to confirm with a reporter when you're talking to them that they're not taping the conversation, or does that go sort of standard within the industry? What's your advice there?
And that's interesting because as we saw in a recent trial about taping, sometimes it's can be one party that can legally do that without alerting the other party. That's where getting good legal counsel is helpful. There are many times reporters ask to tape interviews for the reliability and to make sure that they don't mistake quotes or things like that. That can be helpful at times when a reporter offers to do that. So, but you need to understand the reporters will normally say, may I tape this conversation? We like that as long as everybody understands what the ground rules are. If it's on background or off the record, we tend not to want to tape conversations when they're off the record, but on background where there may be quote attribution later, it allows you to go back and fill that in. I hope that answers the question.
Well, that is a complicated. Because different states have different laws also, right? With whether it's legal or not legal, and it's one sided or not. That one's always confused me, and it always depends on who I ask. But that's good advice.
Right, and Rich, in the UK, they've got very different libel laws than there are here.
Right. All right.
Okay, let's continue. Thanks, Joe.
So this is a good one, avoiding some common mistakes, and Steve and I can both talk about this one. And I just wanted to add, in these crisis situations, they're different. Your leadership style may differ in these crises. Somebody has to take charge, and there may not be a lot of time. So when we're talking about things in a crisis situation, it's a different leadership style. So one of the ones we've obviously been talking about, the common mistake, is a lack of preparation. People aren't prepared. It's like they may be thinking this will never happen. There's no deadline, like I was talking about before. There's no deadline, so you don't prepare, or you keep putting it off. You procrastinate on it because there's no deadline. So that's a huge mistake. No tabletop exercise. You can have the plan, but then don't execute on the plan. You don't practice, right? It's like having a game plan, but you're not practicing. And then having a lack of command and control. Steve and I were just talking about this, where it's really dangerous. You want to talk a little bit about that, Steve?
Yeah, and we've always said that one of the investors' most important concerns in a crisis is what's the CIO doing, what are the portfolio managers doing, and what's the other team doing. So having that clarity and what the roles are, investors get comfort if they know that the CIO is running about the portfolio, and yes, he's being updated, by Rich Bello or whoever, that person is in the command chair, but it's very clear that what they're focused on is the portfolio, because in a crisis, portfolios can get hit. You sometimes find that pricing changes. You will see things like positions that are declining as people look at 13Fs on the fly and they see you've got large positions here. So having the portfolio manager focused on assuring that the portfolio is working the way they are or taking the measures they need to take is absolutely critical for investor confidence.
And communication also really important. If it's unclear, you gotta be really clear with communication, especially if you're dealing with your employees and giving them instructions on what they need to do and do it now. Really important. If you give unclear messaging to your limited partners, then you lose the trust factor, or even with a regulation, you're losing the trust factor, which is really dangerous. Getting it out there fast, making sure you have the proper communication channels established and that everybody knows what they are. When you're talking about communication in an emergency situation, disaster situation, there are internally what we talk about is depends on how quickly a decision needs to be made, how important that communication is. So if it's, for instance, something that's really important and timely, you don't want to send an email. People are busy these days. There's a lot of junk email. They don't check their emails, right? Text is okay, but if it's really important and urgent, you pick up the phone and you call now, right? You get it done. You make sure you speak to somebody and make sure it gets in. I was like, oh yeah, I texted them. It's like, no. You got to make sure this is done now. There's all kinds of Slack stuff out there. But the point is, make sure you're understanding these communication protocols, make sure that they're safe, especially if you're dealing with attorneys. And I think we've talked a little bit about that on the attorney-client privilege stuff. Stakeholder concerns, really make sure you understand what their needs are, understand who they are, and make sure you're not ignoring their needs. When you're ignoring a stakeholder's needs, that's when trouble can happen.
And if I can chime in just with a couple of examples. And again, this is where the preparation comes in. There are times when there are investigations, criminal or otherwise, where, for example, the FBI has alerted reporters to a perp walk. And in one instance, during the height of the insider trading cases in 2010, 2011, they invited a Wall Street Journal reporter to a perp walk, and the person they were going to arrest wasn't there. So the headline was "Person Not There on the Loose" when FBI went to go get them. And you know, the government and FCA, let's look at what they're proposing. Do you think that if they're going to talk about publicizing enforcement actions, that they won't be issuing, that they're planning to issue press releases, and they may be calling reporters to let them know about these press releases and what can be going on? So that would put a firm at a huge disadvantage, because the first time that you may be hearing about it is an FCA press release, and your first call from Bloomberg, the Financial Times, the Times of London, or you name it. That may be the very first time that you hear about the new investigation into your firm. And by the way, they may or may not name individuals, which we view as you know, distinction without a difference. But be prepared, and these things will happen in real time. Okay.
Now going into some deeper stuff. So I kind of digging in deeper to some of the types of contingencies you might have to prepare for. Key man, team departures. There's a lot of different impacts when these things happen. There's operational impacts because they have a lot of knowledge with them. So if they leave and they take the knowledge with them, you can have a huge operational impact. There can be a financial impact, obviously, if you've got a very successful investment team member, huge financial impact. You no longer have that. Reputational impact. Somebody leaves, why aren't you able to keep them? You didn't tell us in advance. So there can be all kinds of reputational issues. Steve will talk about this, and he's got some great examples. Firm closings, which I've had the privilege of experiencing. You know, we were one of the few firms that closed on our own terms. John and I weirdly met at the same time. I wanted to let him know that I wanted to go do my thing, and he wanted to let me know he wanted to go do his thing. We had no idea what we both wanted to meet about. We met, and John told me, he's like, Rich, he's like, you know, I think I'm going to close down the firm. I've got some other interests that I want to, you know, that I want to pursue. And I started laughing. And John's like, why are you laughing? I thought you'd be crying. He's like, this is our baby. We found it together 20 years. I was like, I was going to tell you the same thing. So we closed it down on, one of the few, examples that I can recall, we're both really ready to move on. Now it takes a long time to close a firm down. Blue Ridge is still still a firm. We went from 10 billion to, I think we're 12 million now. There's always little things. It's really hard. In 5 years, it's hard to close down a firm completely. Just know that I think we have some time here. Just
yeah. So let me just make, Rich, let me make 2 quick points on this. On departures and or arrivals, a number of great publications that we all read are data mining LinkedIn. They've been taught how to do that, and that is a lot of calls that we get on a regular basis. Oh, courtesy call to let you know we're about to write a story that person A has joined firm A and that person B has left firm B. Happens all of the time. One of the things that is new on these partner disputes, and we saw this over the last year play out, where not a client, have a lot of respect for the firm, 2 Sigma. They put an update into their Form ADV about a partnership dispute that made its way to the Wall Street Journal and led to a cascading series of stories. So knowing that those types of regulatory filings and Form ADV brochures and things like that, we watch that pretty closely. We talk to our clients about material changes. That can turn into a huge PR story and cascade across an organization. So be aware that your legal filings are things that lead to stories, and reporters are data mining that. Let's keep going.
So performance issues, these are obviously what LPs are very concerned with. You want to make sure that you get them out there. Speed is very important. If people think that you're trying to hide something, then where there's smoke, as John used to say, where there's smoke, there's almost always fire. So of the essence, take responsibility. You like to see a letter come out quickly and taking responsibility, accountability. Then they want to know, the LPs especially want to know, all right, what's the cause of this? Have you really do you really understand where this lack of performance is coming from? And then describe a remediation plan. What are you going to do about it? New hires, double down, stop investing in it, whatever it might be. What's the remediation process going to be? What's your plan going to be? And of course, if you're having performance issues, you want to make sure that those that are lending you money to invest, that they are very clear. You let them know right away. They will know already. But it's really the same as these the bullets above. And you always want, as John would always say, whenever we this is our North Star. Always, our LPs always come first, right? When we have to make a decision, that's our mission. We are in business for our LPs. Whatever's in their best interest is what we're going to do, and that really is always helpful when you're thinking about what you're going to do. Is think about your LPs. What is the right thing to do by your LPs?
And Rich, a very quick story on this. So many of you may recall we represented Amaranth. They had a huge drawdown. One of the things was that the GC and the chief operating officer, we had a plan in place, and as a result of our properly executing that plan, we were able to alert all of the regulators, all of the key constituents in multiple jurisdictions ahead of the announcements coming out. And as opposed to what could normally happen if the regulators are surprised, neither the SEC, the CFTC, or the FERC, who are some of the main regulators, they gave the firm breathing room to handle the portfolio issues while we were providing them with information, but they didn't show up on day one with enforcement. And that gave the firm a lot of opportunity to really get the portfolio right-sized and balanced, get the position where they could save assets and help investors at the end of the day. But it was the plan and executing the plan properly and working with the regulators and politicians to avoid a scrum inside as they were trying to deal with a huge performance issue.
And just on the when you are closing down a firm, it is a tricky disclosure situation, because when you're liquidating, people can be coming after you, and it can be very dangerous. So you have to be very careful to keep that type of information confidential. Get out while you can, sort of, so to speak.
And Rich,
Okay.
as we saw with the Blue Ridge letter, that was out there, and that became sort of the cornerstone of how the reporting was about the decision to return capital.
That's right. That's right. Right. And we had the first article out there, and that from that article, it was a wonderful, wonderful article about, especially about John's career. There's really some really wonderful things that were said about him. Okay.
So, okay.
So yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I think, look, this is all pretty straightforward, but Rich, I want you to talk about your preparation for your SEC exam. Then I'm going to talk about one story about regulatory investigations.
Sure. So as we were about to deregister, I believe it was the Friday, and I believe Terry Malley might be on here. So if I exaggerate, it's too bad because he's on mute, so he can't correct me. But I don't think there's an exaggeration. I think it was a Friday, and it was really just Terry and I left. Other than we had folks in our management company on the tax team, it was really just Terry and I left. After, I think we had 68 people, and Terry was about to deregister in the fund on that following Wednesday. And Terry called me on a Friday, and he said, he's like, Rich, you're never going to believe who called me today. And just from the tone of his voice, I was quite sure I knew who he was talking about. I was like, yes, he's seeing. He's like, yeah. I was like, you're kidding, right? And he's like, not kidding. And I knew he wasn't kidding. Just by tone. Now, that said, there was always we had prepared and prepared and prepared, and Terry literally wrote the book on compliance. He literally wrote the book, and we also had a wonderful chief compliance officer, Mike Cairo, and who has his own firm now, Cloudbreak. He's over there heading that up, and with his partner. And so I was comfortable. with what we had, and that they would come in. And we always wanted that coveted no deficiency letter. I forget what the stats are, but they're very low to get them. So Terry handled the bulk of it, and we did end up getting that no deficiency letter. Now we had prepared and prepared and prepared and prepared and prepared. So this preparation went into ensuring that we had a really clean slate with them. So training, always really important. You want to have compliance manual training, code of ethics. These are standard practices now. If you're not doing that, you're really at the bottom of the rung there. Always have checklists for everything, for filings, regulations. We had checklists to make sure that we were all good. Have these mock SEC exams annually. Again, same as the reasons for above, and then on these regulatory examinations, Steve, you've gone through many of them. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and also on the story yourself.
So a couple of things. Unfortunately, politics sometimes plays into how regulators approach things. We've seen in some instances what could be considered parking tickets turn into CSI crime scenes. And conversely, sometimes we've also seen when the regulators think they've got a CSI crime scene, they end up ratcheting it back to a parking ticket. But in every case, really working with good lawyers who've got deep experience is the first best line of defense. And understanding the times that the government may have better information than you have about a situation, especially if it's a criminal matter. But then there are other times where you may have better information than the government. And that's where the balancing act comes in terms of how these things roll out. But I will say that one of the most interesting situations that I ever ran into was involving one insider trading case where someone was arrested, and the co-conspirator outlined in the complaint with the arrest actually said that the co-conspirator was a portfolio manager working for X firm based in this town, specializing in this area, and had been in another firm doing the same thing. There was only one person in the world that fit the description, and I heard that from a Bloomberg reporter who later published that person's name, and that person later pled guilty to insider trading. So the government will occasionally use their complaints to put the breadcrumbs out that might lead to your front door in an unexpected manner. Let's keep going.
Oh, no, we did it the other way.
Yep.
All right. 6P. This is really somewhat of a summary of it, and I think we do want to leave some time for questions. But up to you, Steve, if you want to go through some of these or not. It's really, I mean, you can read the predict, position, prevent, all things that we kind of talked about before. I think the persevere is a good one. Don't deviate from plan unless you have to. If the situation's changed, then of course you deviate from the plan. Next.
The other quick thing, which is don't guess. When you're in the middle of a crisis, what we like to say is stick to the facts. Don't let a situation turn into BP, where every other day in that big oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, they had to keep changing the numbers. They had to keep changing everything. I like the way sometimes law enforcement does it, which is they only talk about the facts that they have and they don't go any further. And if the facts change, they will tell them, but they don't opine about what could be or what might be. That is how you go from mud to quicksand. And it also hits your credibility, which is really important. Let's keep going. So we wanted to kind of leave this discussion with a couple of our favorite cartoons. So I'll just be quiet for a couple of seconds until we hit the last one. And finally, hopefully when you're sitting across the table and have to do this, no one is hitting the eject button. Rich, let us talk about the offer for the OPG group.
Yeah, so look, the key here behind all of this is right. Don't put your head in the sand. Don't think that these things are not going to happen. They may not, but if they do, you want to be prepared for it, right? So there's a crisis management assessment. I think if you click on that link, you'll be able to get it. And then, yeah, feel free to contact Steve or myself. If we can be of service, let us know. I know when Steve went through this process with us, it was amazing. We felt prepared. It's like, okay, we're prepared for this. It's a good feeling to have. So feel free to contact us.
Yeah.
Oh, and there's a book too. The book comes with I think you just click on the link and you'll get the book. Is my understanding from our team, and Steve was very involved with the book as well.
Okay. Joe,
that's amazing. If I synthesize it down myself, I say to myself, the key takeaway for me is if you don't start it now, it's going to be too late when something happens, right? So you can't get car warranty after your car gets in an accident. You got to do it now. You got to take the first step, and you have to start. So it's an incredible amount of data. You guys were terrific summarizing, which I appreciate. So let me reiterate, if anybody has any questions that they want to hit now, I understand also if you don't want to do them on the webinar, that's okay. You can follow up with Rich or Steve afterwards. Not a problem. So let's see, I have a couple coming in. This is from Munir. Apologies if I'm saying it wrong. What is the role of social media, which might impact the firm faster than other established media? How do you handle the competing media priorities?
So that's a really great question. And what we have found is that some traditional media that have gone online clearly have a greater impact, but that in search, depending on how some of these sites put their names out there and things like that, that can show up high in Google. And what you have to end up doing is really, if there's misinformation, have a plan to go after those sites to get them to pull things down. But what you have to worry about is these are like weeds that keep popping up all over the damn place. So you have to have constant search. You've got to have good folks that know how to handle it. And then sometimes as a last resort, you've got to involve either your GC or external counsel to put additional pressure on some of these sites to take misinformation down.
Great. Let's see, another question from Andrew. How do you facilitate buy-in for mock exams, tabletop exercises, etc., from the front office who may not prioritize putting in the time for such a preventative type of initiative?
You know, that was what, go ahead, Rich, start, and then I'll talk about it in terms of the news today.
Well, I mean, for me, it came right from the front office. John Griffin, who was the president of Tiger Management, he had to deal with a lot of these things. He knew the importance of being prepared. And this is really, you know, it's really a basic, you know, we have an executive coaching arm. We have hundreds of coaches on that side too. And this is one of the most basic things that we talk about when we're coaching front office people, is you've got to be in a proactive mode, not a reactive mode. This goes through your life too, by the way. You're not exercising, right? Doing things. You don't have to exercise. You end up with a problem. So these are proactive things that you should be doing. You know, you can have them read Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. This is just, to me, just such a basic thing. And there are costs associated with it, which may be why the front office may not see the value in it. But you can, there's so many reasons why you want to get in front of it. And Joe, I mean, you summarized it perfectly. You just want to be prepared.
Yeah, if I can add, if these FCA rules come into play, I think anybody who's got a UK presence or is trading in the UK that has any interactions with FCA, this is now paramount. I think what we saw on cybersecurity, I'm sure almost everybody on the webinar has done some cybersecurity prep. Given the ICE fine, and it was about the core of the fine was based on their lack of reaching out to the SEC to disclose it. So if those are the things that you can avoid, and being prepped can help you to there are going to be situations that are going to pop up where you're going to have to do some planning around some of these things, but there's going to be times where people do bad things in an organization, despite all the training, all the preparation, and everything else that you do. They make a bad decision, and all of a sudden your firm's in the crosshairs. That's how I would try to position it, which is that we're talking about money, and unfortunately people make bad decisions as it relates to money.
Yep. Yeah, this is a hard topic, having, you know, lived this experience myself too. And I think it's when you have hard topics, sometimes those are the hardest ones to get started on, because you're sort of trying to avoid it, and this is a very difficult one. So it's great that we're bringing this to the forefront. Rich, I can't wait to read what the more detailed version you wrote in the book. We appreciate you connecting everybody with that. That's going to be terrific. Steve, thank you again. I appreciate both of your time. I know how much effort went into this, and it was a terrific session. So again, thank you. And again, we will send out everybody's contacts and slides to everybody who registered for this to do direct follow-up if they have more questions and want to talk to you guys. So thank you again.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for hosting us.
So thanks, everybody.
Okay,
Thanks,
bye.
Steve.